Hello, my name is Tammy Allen, and I am here to present my action plan. Schools across the nation are experiencing disruptive behavior. The two areas of action research of interest to me are behavior modification and creating a student-centered environment. I wanted to find a behavior modification which would be successful to eliminate disruptive behavior in the classroom. According to Larson, Paz, Bradshaw, Rosenberg, and Dave Vines, behavior can be misconstrued based on the cultural and ethnic backgrounds of students. A need for change exists in room 13. The students in room 13 appear bored, disengaged, passively engaged, or disruptive. An adoption of a no-excuse policy and an implementation of effective strategies for positive outcomes were researched. The demographics of my classroom were taken into consideration, and a selection of 2 behavior modifications were chosen: universal teaching strategies with culturally responsive teaching practices for the action research process. The action research process involves 4 stages: a planning phase, an action phase, an analysis phase, and a conclusion phase. First, the action researcher designs an inquiry to test the theory. Then an action researcher experiences the data process through observation, inquiry, and examination. The action researcher observes students and records field notes. Inquiry encompasses interviews and questionnaires either completed by students or parents, perhaps both. The action researcher examines data in the forms of archival documents, journals, maps, anecdotal recordings, and artifacts. After the collection of data, the action researcher analyzes the data to look for patterns. The research question may lead to modification and an adjustment to realign to the inquiry. After analysis of data, a conclusion or the answers to the inquiry should be met. An important element of action research is the theory of action. The theory of action acts as the master plan for producing the desired outcomes by using the best strategies and techniques. This theory of action concentrates on the benefits of using universal teaching strategies with culturally responsive teaching practices in my 4th grade classroom to minimize undesirable behaviors. My theory of action is, if I implement student-centered activities based on universal teaching strategies, along with culturally responsive teaching practices, my students will maintain high interest in a cooperative learning environment with 0 to little disruptions. The data collection process focuses on 3 questions. What would make learning more interesting? How do student-centered activities impact behavior? What is the relationship of universal teaching strategies with culturally responsive teaching practices to behavior? The data resources chosen for the first question, what would make learning fun, consist of a teacher survey, a student survey, and student journal reflections. Student surveys will provide insight into student-centered activities. The teacher survey can be compared to student surveys to convey any misconceptions the teacher has for engaging lessons. Feedback from the student surveys will guide lesson plans. The journal entries will also aid in lesson planning. Lesson plans, teacher observations, observation notes, student engagement, ratings of engagement, and the functional behavior assessment and reading research will constitute the data collection for the second research question: how do student-centered activities impact behavior? Observation notes and student engagement ratings will provide information to how student-centered activities impact behavior. Notes and ratings can help pinpoint when and where areas of high and low engagement occur. Reading about research and best practices can provide additional ideas to increase engagement in low areas. The third question, what is the relationship of universal teaching strategies with culturally responsive teaching practices to behavior? This entails the following data resources: contrast behavior with activities, correlate lesson plans with student behavior and observation notes, and correlate functional behavior assessments with behavior. The collection of this data for the last question will serve as justification for how universal teaching strategies with culturally responsive teaching practices help to reduce undesirable behavior. During the data collection summary process, I realized additional resources would be required for the triangulation matrix. Behavior interventions with teacher observations would not suffice. The addition of surveys, lesson plans, ratings of student engagement, and functional behavior assessments help to initiate validity. A timetable for the action plan will consist of collecting 6 weeks of data, which is the typical time for collecting data for student and assistant team information to assess whether an intervention plan is effective or not. I am the primary stakeholder and will be responsible for creating a survey through Monkey Survey on the first day and sending the survey link to the students' email addresses. The students are responsible for completing the anonymous survey in technology class with the specialist teacher. This assures the students' information remains anonymous. I will also fill out a teacher survey prior to student surveys for comparison. Once the surveys are printed, gathered, and reviewed, I will identify themes and patterns to guide lesson plans. I will implement universal teaching strategies along with culturally responsive teaching practices on the first day, which will be allocated and adjusted as needed throughout the 6-week process. Teacher observations, observation notes, student engagement, ratings of engagement, and functional behavior assessments will be taken and reviewed daily by myself. Ratings of engagement per subject will be recorded and plotted daily on a bar scale of 0 to 100. This data will be reviewed daily to adjust lesson plans accordingly. Lesson plans will be reviewed along with journal entries, observation notes, and functional behavior assessments weekly to guide the following week's lesson plans. Research will be read as needed throughout the process. The measure of success of my action plan will rely on answering the following 3 questions. What would make learning more interesting? How does student-centered activities impact behavior? What is the relationship of universal teaching strategies with culturally responsive teaching practices to behavior? Ratings of engagement during student-centered activities will review success or failure. If interesting, highly engaged, student-centered activities show a correlation and a significant reduction of classroom disruptions using the implementation of universal teaching strategies along with culturally responsive teaching practices, then these strategies have a high impact on reducing undesirable behaviors. Thank you.